AI does not reduce cost. It replaces visible cost with permanent cost. And you don't see it at deployment. You don't see it in the demo. You don't see it in the first quarter of results when output increases, headcount pressure drops, and efficiency metrics move in the right direction. At that moment, the system appears to be working exactly as promised. But that is not the full economic picture. Because AI systems do not stabilize after they are deployed, they begin to drift, not in a way that triggers alarms, not in a way that breaks the system, but in a way that slowly separates performance from expectation. Inputs change, data shifts, edge cases accumulate, the environment evolves, and the model, trained on a previous state of reality, begins to misalign with the present. Nothing fails, but everything becomes slightly less accurate. And in an economic system, slight degradation is not neutral. It compounds. A recommendation system that is marginally worse reduces conversion. A pricing model that drifts compresses margins. A support system that becomes less reliable increases escalation volume. These effects do not appear at the model level. They appear in revenue, cost, and risk, which means the system has to be corrected continuously. This is where maintenance begins, not as repair, but as alignment. And alignment is not optional, because without it, the system does not hold its value. It erodes it. Maintenance is not what happens when AI breaks. Maintenance is what prevents it from quietly becoming economically irrelevant, which turns maintenance into a permanent requirement, not periodic, continuous. Data pipelines are monitored, inputs validated, outputs evaluated against shifting benchmarks, models retrained, not because they failed, but because reality moved. And every one of these actions carries cost. Repeatedly, this is where the cost structure changes. At adoption, AI is framed as a project. A model is built, integrated, deployed. The cost appears upfront, discrete. Maintenance converts that cost into a stream, persistent, expanding, difficult to reduce. The more successful the system becomes, the more expensive it becomes to maintain. Because success increases reliance, and reliance increases the cost of failure. When an AI system is peripheral, small degradation is tolerable. When it is embedded in pricing, operations, customer interaction, or decision-making, even small deviations become financially meaningful, which forces a response. More monitoring, more evaluation, more oversight, more redundancy. Each layer added not to grow the system, but to protect it. And this is where cost stops behaving like software. It starts behaving like infrastructure. A bridge does not become cheaper to maintain as more traffic uses it. It becomes more critical, more inspected, more reinforced. AI follows the same logic. The more load it carries, the more it must be sustained. And sustaining it is not optional. Maintenance is not a support cost. It is a margin cost. Because none of these activities generate new revenue. They preserve existing performance. They prevent loss. Which means every dollar spent on maintenance does not expand output, but is required to keep output from declining. This compresses margin, because the system still appears efficient on the surface. Outputs are fast. Marginal cost per inference is low, but that marginal cost is incomplete. It excludes the cost required to keep the system valid, and that cost never stops. Here is the uncomfortable part. In many cases, AI does not make the system cheaper over time. It makes it more expensive to keep stable. That is the inversion. And the longer the system runs, the more this inversion becomes visible, not as a single event, but as a pattern. Maintenance cycles become more frequent. Evaluation becomes more strict. Oversight becomes more layered. What began as a lean system becomes surrounded by structures whose only purpose is to keep it aligned with reality. None of those structures existed at the start. All of them become necessary. At the edge, generating one more output looks almost free, but behind that output is a maintenance layer that never stops operating, monitoring systems running constantly, data pipelines updating, models retraining, humans reviewing edge cases. The output is cheap. The system that makes it reliable is not. And if that system is neglected, the output stops being valuable, which means marginal cost is not the right unit of analysis. Total sustaining cost is. AI does not eliminate cost. It transforms cost from variable labor into fixed and recurring maintenance infrastructure. Instead of paying per task, the organization pays to sustain the system that performs those tasks. And that system cannot be turned off. This is where cost flexibility disappears. Labor can be adjusted. Hiring slows. Teams are restructured. Maintenance does not contract the same way. Once systems are embedded, monitoring, retraining, and oversight cannot be removed without increasing risk. And that risk becomes degradation, and degradation becomes loss. Maintenance becomes a semi-fixed cost, persistent even when conditions change. And this persistence creates a new constraint. It limits how quickly an organization can adjust its cost base. Revenue can fluctuate, demand can shift, but the cost required to keep AI systems stable remains, which means volatility is absorbed by margin. Once an AI system is integrated deeply enough, once decisions, workflows, and revenue streams depend on it, the organization is no longer choosing whether to maintain it. It is required to. Turning off maintenance does not reduce cost. It accelerates failure, which means the system demands continuous input, not to improve, to remain acceptable. And over time, this compounds. Maintenance expands with scale. Every new deployment introduces new dependencies, new failure modes, new edge cases. Each requires monitoring, validation, intervention. The system grows. So does the maintenance burden. And because this cost is distributed, engineering, data, operations, risk, it rarely appears as a single number. It fragments, it hides, it accumulates. But economically, it behaves as one system. A system that requires continuous investment simply to hold its position. And that leads to the final shift. The value of AI is often framed in what it replaces: labor, time, friction. But the durability of that value depends entirely on what sustains it. And what sustains it is maintenance. Not as an afterthought, as a permanent layer of cost that determines whether the system continues to produce value or begins to quietly destroy it. Because degradation in AI is not dramatic. It is subtle, and subtle degradation is the most dangerous kind. It does not trigger immediate correction. It moves slowly enough to be tolerated until it compounds into measurable loss, which is why maintenance cannot be deferred. It cannot be minimized, and it cannot be eliminated once the system matters. AI does not remove cost. It relocates it into a form that is harder to see, harder to reduce, and impossible to avoid once it is in place. Maintenance is not what happens after AI works. Maintenance is what keeps it from becoming a liability. And once you are operating at scale, that is not optional. It is the cost you cannot turn off.